On a tense mission at sea, the commander glanced around and asked casually, "Any divers here?" The room erupted in laughter when Madison calmly said she would dive. Everyone assumed it was a joke, a simple analyst pretending to be capable. But moments later, she descended effortlessly into the deep blue, reaching the required 50 meters with precision and control that left even the most seasoned operators frozen in disbelief. The ocean seemed to obey her, and the mission was accomplished flawlessly, shattering every expectation and leaving the team questioning everything they thought they knew about her. From that moment, Madison began to quietly craft her revenge, a plan designed to reveal her true capabilities with intelligence, strategy, and a calm elegance that none could anticipate. She didn't need brute force or loud words. Every move was calculated, every action a message. Underestimate her at your own peril. What followed would challenge the arrogance of the entire unit, expose weaknesses they never knew they had, and redefine respect in the most unexpected way. But what exactly did Madison do next, and how did she turn the tables with such flawless precision? Those answers will leave you stunned, but before we proceed, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now let's understand how this story really began. The North Atlantic heaved beneath the hull of the MKV Special Operations craft, each swell slamming against the reinforced frame with a relentless rhythm. The wind carried a biting salt, stinging exposed skin, whipping through the taut lines securing the vessel. Madison stood at the corner of the deck, the hum of the twin engines vibrating through her boots, her gaze fixed on the horizon where gray met gray. The mission was unforgiving in its parameters: retrieve a black box from a downed reconnaissance drone perched on a jagged, underwater shelf 50 meters below. The currents roared at 6 knots, carving eddies around the craft, tugging at every line, every anchor point, testing the stability of even the most experienced operators. Commander Vance's eyes scanned the 6 men arrayed before him. "My lead diver is down with barotrauma. Any divers here qualified for mixed gas deep submergence?" His voice carried the clipped authority of someone who had seen operators lose control under stress. Tatrick, the squad leader, shifted his weight, the tactical vest compressing against his chest as he smirked, one eyebrow arched, lips twitching with condescension. His thumb jerked toward Madison, who remained motionless, a study in controlled indifference. "Well, don't ask the secretary, sir. She might break a nail." Laughter ricocheted off the hull. Madison's expression didn't falter. Her eyes, steel and flint, remained fixed ahead. The corners of her mouth didn't twitch. Not a flinch betrayed the surge of adrenaline coursing beneath her calm exterior. "I'll go," she said, voice flat, devoid of inflection yet carrying the weight of certainty. Tatrick cackled, a short bark of disbelief, and leaned against the bulkhead, knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge. You're here to count beans, sweetheart. 50 meters will crush your lungs before you clear the hull." Madison didn't respond. Her hands moved with precise efficiency. She stripped off her jacket, revealing a scar running from her right shoulder to the collarbone, faintly puckered, a souvenir from a classified operation in Yemen. She retrieved the Dreiger rebreather from the locker and ran a methodical pre-dive check. Oxygen sensors verified, O2 partial pressures within operational parameters, hoses sealed, valves tested. Each green indicator light was acknowledged with a subtle nod. "Green across the board," she said, stepping to the gunwale with the controlled cadence of a combat swimmer trained for zero-error execution. Tatrick barked, voice sharp and urgent. "Hey, get away from there before you kill yourself and I have to fill out the paperwork." His jaw muscles ticked involuntarily, his pulse visible at the temple. Madison glanced briefly at Commander Vance. The commander's subtle nod, almost imperceptible, was the only acknowledgement of authorization she required. She rolled backward off the deck, splash, silence claimed the boat. The depth gauge on the console flickered downward in precise increments. 10 meters, the rebreather hissed softly with each controlled exhalation. 20 meters, her fins adjusted to the shifting current. Each stroke calculated, no wasted energy. 40 meters. The nitrogen loading climbed in her tissues, yet her breathing remained metronomic, pulse steady, muscles cold but relaxed. 50 meters, the jagged shelf loomed in the filtered light, the black box resting like a sentinel. Madison secured herself with one hand on the rock face, the other unlatched the payload. Not a twitch out of place, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Above, Patrick's smirk faltered. His eyelids fluttered, a micro-tick betraying his disbelief. "She's moving efficiently," he whispered, almost to himself. But at that depth, narcosis could still hit. Madison surfaced 20 minutes later, careful decompression stops adhered to with metronomic precision. She tossed the black box onto the deck at Patrick's feet, removed the mask, and breathed with slow, deliberate rhythm. Her chest rose evenly, heart rate nearly baseline, the only evidence of exertion and a faint trace of moisture at her hairline. Patrick stared, mouth slack, jaw tight, nostrils flaring as a flush of embarrassment crept across his face. The laughter of moments ago had vanished, replaced by a more corrosive presence, a darkening edge of incredulity, bordering on rage. "Lucky currents," he muttered, voice low, barely audible, as if speaking it might make it true. Madison didn't speak. She adjusted her masked strap, eyes scanning the instruments, the horizon, the men. A quiet professional at the apex of control, uncheckable, unspoken dominance radiating from every measured motion. The ride back to the Naval Special Warfare Base was an oppressive silence, the kind that pressed into the lungs with the weight of unresolved confrontation. Madison sat upright, back rigid, fingers gliding over the tablet screen with precise, deliberate movements. Her eyes scanned the manifest, lines of coordinates and mission parameters, reflecting faintly on the lenses of her glasses. The hum of the engines was a steady counterpoint to the occasional clink of a rifle being methodically cleaned by one of the operators. Each brushstroke against the barrel, each rotating motion on the scope, was executed with obsessive attention, the men projecting control through ritualized maintenance. Patrick sat directly opposite her, his posture stiff, shoulders squared, fists clenched on his knees. The muscle along his jaw pulsed visibly with each attempt to restrain the fury coiling inside him. The faint sheen of sweat at his hairline caught the cabin lights, accentuating the tension along his temple. He could not reconcile the dive, the precision, the composure. There had to be a flaw, a miscalculation, a trick. In his mind, admitting otherwise was impossible. The idea that a logistics analyst, a woman seated quietly in the corner of his squat, could outperform him in a critical deep-water operation was unthinkable. "Gauge must have been off," he muttered, the words deliberately audible yet deniable, a seed of doubt cast into the cabin. "Currents probably pushed her down. Pure luck she didn't embolize." The syllables hit the metal bulkhead with a clipped, defensive edge. Patrick's eyes flicked toward the depth gauge readings in his mind, replaying the descent, questioning the physics, the decompression schedule, the minute-by-minute control. The tiny twitch at the corner of his left eye betrayed the cognitive dissonance he could not vocalize. Madison's fingers continued their precise navigation across the tablet, eyes following columns and codes, unflinching, unacknowledging. Each swipe, each tap was executed with the calm deliberation of someone who understood risk in its purest, unromanticized form. Patrick's anger, however, fed on silence. It was an affront he could not categorize, a non-response that gnawed at the structure of his ego. To him, silence equaled arrogance, and arrogance was an offense against the hierarchy of his world. He leaned forward, the motion calculated to dominate space, closing the distance between them. His voice dropped to a hiss, edged with venom, every word serrated with frustration. "You think you're special because you grabbed a box. Real operators know the difference between a courier and a warrior. Stick to your spreadsheets, Madison. Next time, the ocean won't be so polite." Madison finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes met his with a flat, unyielding assessment, the boredom in her expression a carefully applied veneer. Her lips did not curl, no inflection soft, and the statement, yet it landed with surgical precision. "Your regulator is leaking, Patrick. The O-ring is compromised. You might want to check that before you lecture me on being a warrior." Patrick's eyes darted down. A subtle hiss of escaping air, almost imperceptible but fatal in its implication, revealed the flaw. Tiny bubbles escaped from the backup regulator, rising like minuscule testaments to his oversight. His face drained of color, replaced with a flush of shame and disbelief. He had missed a basic Tier 1 equipment check, a procedural failure invisible to the untrained eye but catastrophic in operational terms. The oversight, the simplest of preventative protocols, had been ignored in his rush to assert authority. Madison returned her gaze to the tablet, tapping and swiping as though nothing had occurred. the slight twitch of her fingers betraying the undercurrent of vigilance maintained for the entire squad's safety. Her mind catalogued the threat, assessing Patrick not as a subordinate, but as a potential liability, a man armed, skilled, yet unstable due to ego bruised beyond rational bounds. She drafted a message to an encrypted channel, fingers precise, movements imperceptible, asset unstable. Proceeding with Phase 2, the cabin smelled of salt, oil, and unspoken confrontation. Patrick's chest rose and fell unevenly, the cadence shallow, rapid. The other men avoided his gaze, their shoulders tight, hands busy, each swipe of the bore brush a physical displacement of cognitive dissonance. Madison, quiet, unyielding, sat among them as a fulcrum of control, the pulse in her wrist steady, heart rate barely above baseline, every micro-expression calibrated. Her eyes flicked once toward Patrick, noting the tension in the jaw, the twitch of the temple, the minuscule adjustment of the vest straps, all outward manifestations of internal collapse he could not articulate. She made no move to confront, no words to provoke. Her presence alone reshaped the environment, the squad's mental equilibrium, the subtle hierarchy, the narrative of competence and authority. Patrick's mind raced, rationalizations collapsing against the undeniable facts of her performance, her composure, her quiet dominance over a situation that had stripped him bare. Madison knew the fracture, and his ego was just the beginning. She had observed, catalogued, and now waited, every breath measured, every blink timed, preparing for the precise moment to convert his instability into operational insight. The atmosphere inside the Naval Special Warfare briefing room carried a density that felt almost structural, as if the tension itself had mass. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above the lawn table, illuminating the mission bore, where Operation Blindfold glowed, in stark, uncompromising red. The graphics outlined a multi-room kill house layout, corridors marked with angles of probability, entry points, occlusion zones. A hostage rescue scenario, nominally a training rotation, yet the parameters were unmistakably punitive. Live fire with munitions, full-speed clearance, time pressure, and zero margin for hesitation. Commander Van stood at the podium, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, posture relaxed but gaze razor-focused. The faint tick at the corner of his left eye betrayed the weight of what he was about to assign. The operator sat rigidly, bodies angled forward as if bracing for impact. Patrick leaned back in his chair with forced nonchalance, though his fingers drummed a rapid cadence on his thigh, tapping out an anxious rhythm he likely didn't realize he was producing. "This is a stress test," Van said, voice steady. "Patrick, you're team lead, Madison. You're on OPFER." Patrick's lips curled upward slowly, a grin that didn't reach his eyes. His jaw tightened one heartbeat, then another, as if he'd been waiting for this chance. To him, OPFER meant prey, a rabbit in a maze. A sanctioned opportunity to degrade her physically under the guise of training. His knuckles cracked loudly as he stretched his fingers, shoulders pulling back in the posture of a man smelling victory before the fight began. "Understood, sir," he replied. "We'll try not to bruise her too bad." A few of the men shifted in their seats, subtle micro-movements, a glance downward, a jaw tightening, a hand curling around the strap of a plate carrier. Discomfort, not with Madison, but with Patrick's eagerness. A SEAL team was a pressure vessel. Any imbalance threatened structural integrity. "One condition," Van said, the room freezing in anticipation. "Madison will be unarmed. Her objective is evasion and intelligence gathering. Patrick, your objective is neutralization." A pulse of quiet rippled through the room, barely perceptible, but Madison felt it like a shift in barometric pressure. An unarmed analyst against an armed fire team inside a confined structure was not a drill. It was a crucible, a psychological test disguised as physical assessment. Vance's expression remained unreadable, though the slow inhale through his nose hinted at deeper reasoning. Madison rose, smoothing the wrinkles from her fatigues. Her breathing was shallow for one controlled second before resuming its usual disciplined cadence. "Rules of engagement," she asked. "Standard non-lethal." "Simunition rounds, copy," she said. Voice neutral. She turned toward the prep room, movement steady, shoulders square. She didn't glance back. Her departure left a vacuum behind her, a momentary absence that heightened the tension already in the air. Inside the gear-up room, she opened a metal drawer and bypassed the heavier protective equipment. No helmets, no pads. She selected only a roll of duct tape, pressing it once with her thumb, assessing adhesive strength, and a small rectangular mirror she held up briefly, angling it toward the ceiling. Her reflection showed no fear, just calculation. In the adjacent locker room, the squad gathered around Patrick. The air smelled of CLPOL, sweat, and adrenaline. Patrick's voice carried a edge sharpened by insecurity. Sweet band clear, aggressive dominance. "I want her cornered in 2 minutes or less," he ordered, pacing as he spoke. "Let's show command why civilians don't belong in the teams." The men nodded, some with more enthusiasm than others, their micro-expressions tight, nostrils flaring slightly, shoulders stiff, eyes narrowing in anticipation. Patrick laughed, mocking her dive again, imitating her descent with exaggerated hand gestures to coax amusement from the team. He didn't notice the locker door beside him open an inch. Madison's hand, steady as a surgeon's, slipped inside long enough to extract the firing pin from his bolt carrier group. She slid it into her sleeve with a practiced motion. Equipment discipline was entry-level, negligence carried consequences. And this exercise was as much about auditing readiness as it was testing skill. Patrick slammed his locker shut, his smile rang hollow. The lines around his eyes tightened with the pressure he refused to acknowledge. He had no idea that by stepping into the kill house today, he was entering her domain, not his. And he certainly didn't know that Madison, unarmed and outnumbered, had just turned the training scenario into a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. The kill house sprawled before Patrick's team, like a labyrinth of plywood and shadow. Each corridor twisted unexpectedly, walls scarred from previous live-fire rotations, the scent of gun oil and dust hanging in the recycled air. Patrick led the stack formation, shoulders rigid, knees bent, weapon held tight against his chest. Boots thudded against the floorboards, each impact echoing in the confined space. His night vision goggles hummed, lenses tinted green, scanning for thermal signatures, yet every room they cleared remained empty. "Room 1 clear," he whispered into the comms, voice low but carrying a subtle edge, the kind that demanded acknowledgement. His jaw twitched, the muscles along the side flexing with irritation he could not fully articulate. The squad swept the ground floor systematically, a controlled mechanical rhythm. Heat signatures registered briefly, flickering, but always nothing sustained. Silence became a pressure, a tactile force pressing against the eardrums. It was as if Madison had dissolved into the environment itself, leaving nothing but calculated absence. "Check the ceiling," Patrick ordered, tone clipped, eyes scanning the shadows where corners met ceilings. Then the lights cut, abruptly. Total darkness swallowed the structure, the hum of fluorescent bulbs vanishing into nothing. Patrick's goggles flared momentarily, their auto gain adjusting to slowly, exposing him to a brief, disorienting blindness. His pulse thumped visibly in his neck, subtle yet undeniable, fingers tightening around the foregrip of his rifle. "She cut the breaker," whispered one of the squad members, voice barely audible, tight with disbelief. "How does a logistics analyst know the wiring schematics of the kill house?" Patrick's eyes snapped toward him. The tiny vein in his temple pulsed, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Shut up and focus," he barked, the command more self-directed than to the operator. His jaw twitched, a repetitive tick betraying the frustration of his faltering authority. From the hallway to their left came a rhythmic tapping, methodical, deliberate. It carried through the air ducts, metallic and unnervingly precise. Patrick signaled, hands flicking almost imperceptibly, instructing the stack to converge. The team moved, boots sliding silently, rifles raised, fingers grazing triggers. They breached the door with practiced force and fired. Pop, 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 echoes bounced from walls, metal, and plywood. The room remained empty. The tapping persisted, unyielding, revealing its true nature, a metal washer tied to a string, swinging against a pipe, motion maintained by a slowly melting chunk of ice. A simple, yet elegant distraction. Patrick's lips thinned, exhaling sharply through his nose. "She's playing games," he muttered, barely audible, voice tight with restrained agitation. "Spread out. 2-man teams, flush her out." The squad split, moving methodically yet predictably, each pair sweeping parallel corridors. Patrick's eyes flicked constantly between corners and ceiling lines, minuscule beads of sweat glistening on his temple. He was hyper-aware, muscles taut, yet the structure of the op was fracturing under the weight of unseen threats. Madison watched from above, hidden in a ventilation shaft that ran the length of the hallway. Her body was still, controlled, each breath measured at exactly 45 beats per minute. Her chest expanded with the precision of a trained diver managing nitrogen load, shallow, deliberate, near invisible. She observed the movement below with predator-calculated patience, eyes tracking thermal outlines, gestures, micro-expressions, every anomaly in posture and stance. Even she felt the fatigue from the earlier dive, a faint ache in her diaphragm, a subtle depletion in extremity strength imperceptible to any observer, but a reminder that even Tier 1 operators managed resources conservatively. Her fingers brushed the edge of the vent grate, maintaining balance, muscles cold but relaxed, pulse steady. Madison was not hiding, she was hunting. Each second, each pause, each calculated inhalation was part of a larger choreography, a psychological map she laid over the predictable patterns of the squad below. Tatrick's shadow moved, rifle scanning, eyes narrowing. The ventilation above caught no reflection in his lenses, no thermal signature. He did not know she was observing him. The rhythm of the operation, so familiar in previous drills, had become fractured under the silent intelligence of a single operator who had redefined the rules without firing a shot. Madison dropped silently behind Miller, her movements fluid, controlled, each step landing lightly against the plywood floor. She read his stance instantly, elbows slightly flared, shoulders forward, micro-adjustments betraying tension in his triceps. Before Miller could raise his rifle, her arms coiled around his neck and shoulder, a precise sleeper hold compressing the carotid artery. For seconds, his eyes widened slightly, pupils dilating as consciousness ebbed, body slackening almost imperceptibly. Madison guided him down gently, lowering him to the floor with the care of someone handling sensitive equipment, her fingers brushing the radio at his belt. She pocketed it, tapping the earpiece's mic with a subtle double-click, the universal signal for affirmative, but she remained silent, letting the auditory void amplify the squad's confusion. Tatrick's voice crackled through the earpiece, tight, impatient. "Miller, status?" Silence answered him. Madison's gaze flicked toward the next doorway, calculating, scanning thermal outlines, micro-movements in shadow. Two operators were clearing the corner ahead, rifles raised, boots moving in sync. She pulled the small mirror from her pack, angling it precisely. The beam from the tactical light caught the reflective surface and flared directly into the lead man's NVGs, his pupils contracted, eyes darting, breath-catching micro-expressions she catalogued in milliseconds. In that infinitesimal lapse, she swept his legs out from under him, the rifle bouncing harmlessly to the floor. The second man reacted, momentum carrying him forward. Madison intercepted with a single, precise pivot, disarming him with a fluid redirection of force. His own body mechanics turned against him. The squad's cohesion fractured visibly, even in their controlled training formations. Within 10 minutes, Patrick's team was reduced to just him and one hesitant operator. The man whispered, uncertainty threading through his tone. "Sir, maybe she's not just an analyst." Patrick's jaw tightened, a vein twitching at the side of his temple, a minuscule tick betraying his rapidly rising panic. He silenced the man with a sharp finger gesture, eyes flicking over the hall, calculating escape routes, but the seed of doubt had already lodged in the operator's mind. Alone now in the central hallway, Patrick's sweat glistened along his brow, droplets forming and sliding imperceptibly down to his temple. His hands gripped the rifle so tightly the knuckles whitened. Every breath he drew was shallow, ragged, punctuated by the metallic click of his boots pivoting against the floorboards. He spun, sweeping the shadows, eyes straining for any hint of movement. "Come out, Madison, stop hiding." His voice cracked, pitched higher than he intended, betraying his internal disorientation. Her voice echoed back, calm, omnipresent, emanating from every shadow and corner. "I'm not hiding, Patrick, I'm evaluating." He fired blindly into the ceiling, mechanical, desperate. Evaluating what? How to file paperwork. A slow exhalation from Madison. Measured, deliberate, evaluating your fitness for command. The words hung in the air, each syllable calculated, clinical. Patrick froze mid-breath. The realization seeped through him like ice. This was not a game, not a drill for an analyst's ego. The way she had dismantled his team, The psychological layering of each move, the silent anticipation of their reactions. He was being tested at a level he had neither anticipated nor prepared for. A faint creak from behind him, floorboards responding to weight, pulled his attention. Instinctively, he spun, finger on the trigger, shoulders coiling, posture rigid but reactionary. His heart hammered in his chest, a microsecond too slow against the predator who had rewritten the rules of engagement without ever drawing a firearm. Madison's eyes, even unseen, tracked his every breath, every twitch, cataloging, measuring, waiting. Patrick's mind raced for control, for dominance, for something he could assert over the invisible operator who had rendered his team irrelevant in 10 minutes. The corridor stretched, shadows thick, the echoes of movement minimal yet magnified. He realized the depth of his miscalculation. This was no longer about asserting rank. This was survival, performance under scrutiny, and the quiet, lethal competence of an operator who understood far more than he could fathom. Madison's stance was deceptively relaxed, her shoulders low, hands empty, weight balanced evenly on both feet. 5 paces separated her from Patrick, who glared, the rifle trembling slightly in his grip. His jaw tensed, a vein pulsing at the side of his temple, and his nostrils flared with each ragged inhale. The room seemed to shrink around him, every shadow a threat, every silence a countdown. Madison's eyes remained calm, assessing, flint hard. "Shoot me," she said softly, her tone even, measured, carrying the weight of authority without aggression. "It's a simunition round. It will sting, but you win." Patrick's finger twitched over the trigger. His entire body was taut with the need to assert dominance, ego screaming for release. "You think I won't," he spat, lips pulled tight, teeth clenched. "I know you will," Madison replied, voice smooth, deliberate. "That's your problem. You focus on the kill, not the objective." He pulled the trigger, click, the weapon's silence echoed in the cavernous hallway. He squeezed again, click, the sound of failure was absolute, punctuating his overconfidence. His knuckles whitened, and a bead of sweat traced down the side of his forehead. The rifle felt suddenly alien in his hands, a cold metal reminder of his lapse. Madison stepped closer, her gaze sliding over the rifle, lingering on the subtle hissing of the O-ring, the microalignment of the carrier group. "I removed the firing pin from your bolt carrier group in the locker room while you were rallying the team," she said softly, each word precise, surgical. "You didn't check your weapon before the op. You failed inspection." Again, Patrick's face drained of color, then flushed purple, veins standing out against hot skin. The realization hit him as physically as the empty click of his rifle. His breathing quickened, shallow, punctuated by involuntary eye twitches and nervous tick he couldn't mask. Without thinking, without protocol, he lashed out, throwing the weapon to the ground and charging. The movement was wild, uncontrolled, a raw surge of aggression untempered by tactical reasoning. Madison met him with calm inevitability. She stepped inside his guard, absorbing the momentum with her forearm. Micro adjustments in posture, subtle shifts in weight distribution, every centimeter measured. His haymaker overshot. She executed a precise leg sweep, her body coiling and releasing energy like a spring. Patrick's feet left the floor. Momentum carried him down, crashing to the plywood with controlled force. His arms flailed instinctively, but Madison didn't strike. She maintained the quiet, calculated control of the situation. Her boots settled on his chest, the pressure deliberate, enough to immobilize without causing injury. His breaths came in rapid bursts, chest rising and falling under the weight. Micro-movements in his fingers clenching, unclenching reflected the conflict between instinctive rage and the unyielding reality of his position. Madison's lips moved barely perceptibly, whispering, "Dead." Lights flickered back to life, cutting through the shadows, revealing Commander Vance on the catwalk above. His expression was unreadable, authoritative, a silent witness to the sequence of controlled dominance. The squad, still recovering from the rapid succession of failures and disruptions, gathered slowly, boots echoing, murmuring subdued astonishment. Miller's eyes met Madison's briefly, a subtle nod acknowledging both skill and discipline, a silent respect earned in moments rather than words. Patrick remained pinned, chest rising and falling rapidly, eyes wide and unfocused, absorbing the full weight of his humiliation. The rifle lay discarded, inert, a symbol of misplaced confidence and overlooked procedure. Madison shifted her weight slightly, maintaining balance, keeping the minimal pressure necessary to control without harm, embodying the principles of precision, restraint, and authority that defined her entire approach. Every exhale she drew was calm, regulated, her internal pulse steady, in contrast to the storm of adrenaline still raging in Patrick. The room had transformed from a controlled training environment into a tableau of lessons in discipline, control, and the consequences of arrogance. Silence stretched for a heartbeat longer than comfortable before the squad began to reorganize, the hierarchy momentarily suspended, attention fixed on the operator who had dismantled assumptions with nothing more than precision, pose, and quiet professionalism. The debriefing room smelled of disinfectant and ozone from the simunition rounds. The long metal table gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting the rigid postures of the squad. Patrick sat at one end, fingers drumming a rapid, uneven rhythm on the tabletop, a visible tremor running through his right eyelid. His jaw clenched and unclenched, the muscles stiff, a micro-expression of panic and anger coexisting. He exhaled through his nose sharply, each breath punctuating the words he spat with rising intensity. She compromised unit cohesion, he barked, slamming the heel of his hand onto the polished surface. The sharp rap reverberated, causing a slight jump to Miller, who sat nearest Madison. She tampered with my equipment, disabled the lights, endangered the team with cowboy theatrics. If this were a real deployment, we'd all be dead. Patrick's eyes flicked to Madison, pupils tight, nostrils flaring, lips pale under stress. He was projecting every ounce of his professional inadequacy onto her, trying to turn outrage into authority. She's a liability. I want a formal inquiry into her conduct, he hissed, fingers curling into tight fists that left white impressions on the table's edge. Madison remained still, hands folded on her lap, a faint crease forming between her brows, but her posture suggested patience rather than intimidation. She let him vent, allowing the performance to peak, knowing it would eventually collapse under scrutiny. Her eyes scanned the room, noting subtle cues: the tilt of Miller's head, the small smirk suppressed by Hensley, the shifting weight of the younger operators who were processing the reality of the encounter. Commander Vance's gaze cut through the room like a scalpel, calm and deliberate. He didn't blink as he leaned slightly forward, elbows resting lightly on the table. "You want an inquiry, Lieutenant?" His voice was flat, surgical, removing the heat from Patrick's theatrics. "Yes, sir. I want her background vetted. I don't believe she's just an analyst. Clearly, some washed-out contractor trying to relive glory days." Patrick snapped, lips tight, a vein twitching along the side of his forehead. His hands gripped the edge of the table so firmly that knuckles whitened. Madison's response was soft but deliberate. "Be careful what you ask for, Patrick." She didn't raise her voice, didn't lean forward. Her control radiated from the small gestures, the steady set of her jaw, the calm pivot of her wrist as she flexed her fingers imperceptibly. Patrick's face flushed, a mixture of frustration and incredulity, and he shot back, louder, "I'm asking for the truth." "Who are you, really?" Madison stood smoothly, chair sliding back with a whisper against the linoleum. The movement was deliberate, measured. "The truth," she said, voice even, each word weighted, "is that we have a real mission briefing in 48 hours. High Command has been monitoring this unit and greenlit Operation Ivory Coast based on recent intel. We deploy soon." Her eyes met Vance's, acknowledging the chain of command, then shifted to Patrick with unflinching clarity. Vance nodded once, succinctly, a silent signal of authority. "The inquiry waits. We have a hostage situation in international waters." "Patrick, you're late." "Madison, your support. Later." In a brief, quiet moment outside the room, he added, "Keep an eye on him. This is part of the audit." Patrick's smirk returned, a twitch of self-satisfaction masking the nervous tension behind his eyes. He had survived the training debacle. Now, in the realm of real consequences, he intended to assert dominance. His plan formed like a sharpened edge: assign her to the rear guard, keep her away from action, and document any perceived failure. His pulse was quick but controlled, a trained mask of confidence overlaying simmering doubt. Madison followed the squad out, her boots clicking softly against the floor. Her wristwatch glinted under the ceiling lights, pulse steady, breathing measured. Yet beneath the calm surface, a quiet awareness pressed against the edges of her discipline. The weight of the undercover role, the constant vigilance, the tension of human unpredictability. A rare twinge of self-questioning flickered. She noted it, processed it, and pushed it aside. The mission came first, always. The squad moved down the corridor in near-perfect silence, Patrick at the lead, Madison close enough to observe, distant enough to remain unseen. Micro-expressions, subtle shifts in weight, the barely audible draw of breath, all of it became data, analyzed, logged. In the quiet professionalism that defined her, Madison was both observer and executor, ready for the storm to come. The cold spray of ocean mist clung to the team's gear, saturating the maul pouches and the Velcro patches of their tactical vests. Each breath left a thin fog in the moonless darkness. The Zodiacs cut silently through the choppy waves, engines throttled low, yet the rhythmic slap of the hull against the water was a constant reminder of how exposed they were. Madison's fingers traced the edge of her tablet, checking the comms feed of last-minute satellite imagery, noting inconsistencies in the pirates' positions. Patrick paddled anxiously behind her, scanning the bow with wide eyes, jaw tight, hands gripping the boarding ladders so forcefully that the knuckles whitened under the tactical gloves. The ladders creaked under weight, and Patrick moved first, chest pressed against the steel hull, eyes scanning upward. He thought he had trained for every scenario, but the moment his boot touched the top rail, the world erupted in fire. Suppressed automatic gunfire punched through the night, bullets striking the metal rail with metallic chimes that echo like death knells. Two of the squad were slammed backward, impact rattling their vest plates, forcing them to the deck in a heap. The acrid smell of gunpowder and salt water filled the nostrils. Patrick froze, mid-step, muscles locking in rigid terror. His face drained of color, the subtle tremor along his jaw betrayed a surge of panic. He pressed himself against a crate, curling into a tight ball as if the action alone could shield him from the incoming fire. "We're pinned. I can't move." His voice quivered, eyes darting, scanning shadows, betraying a mind frantically trying to rewrite reality to avoid responsibility. The squad behind him faltered, trapped in the lethal corridor of the ladder. Bullets pocked the metal deck around their boots, sparks flying in tiny arcs where rounds struck steel. The wind off the ocean whipped the hem of Madison's uniform, but she was immovable in focus. She stepped lightly, silently, moving not with haste but with a terrifying efficiency born of habit and instinct. Her eyes flicked over angles, noting lines of fire and shadows, calculating lethal vectors in milliseconds. A figure vaulted over the rail, Madison. She landed on the deck with barely a ripple in stance, scanning the deck like a predator, breathing measured, pulse quiet under adrenaline. She zeroed on the pirate manning the heavy machine gun. With 2 precise shots, she neutralized the threat before the man could react, the suppressor dampening each rapport, but not the finality. Her sidearm was out in a blink, clearing the upper deck in a seamless transition. Each movement was practiced but not mechanical, fluid but lethal. Patrick, still curled behind the crate, felt her hand on his vest. Her grip was firm but professional, tugging him upright. "Get up," she hissed, muscles rigid, eyes hard. He stumbled, terrified, legs quivering, unable to reconcile his training with the reality of combat. Madison shook him, no excessive force, just enough to communicate authority. "Focus, Lieutenant, I can't," he stammered, voice breaking, pupils dilated in panic. "There's too many." Madison's eyes narrowed. She keyed the mic, voice dropping into command voice, a low, authoritative timbre that brooked no argument, every syllable precise, controlled. "All stations, this is Sierra 1. Lead is compromised. I'm assuming command per emergency protocols, execute pattern Delta, frag out." The squad froze for a heartbeat, then recognized the authority emanating from her. Training had taught them to respond to capability and command presence, not rank alone. Micro-expressions shifted, the doubt in their eyes yielded to recognition of skill. They followed her lead, executing the breach with surgical precision, grenades tossed, doors kicked, movement synchronized. Patrick remained behind, rooted in disbelief. Sweat ran in rivulets down his temple, his breath shallow, rapid. Every instinct screamed in chaos, yet Madison's calm, precise motions carved order from the storm. She swept the deck, covered the blind spots, and neutralized threats with a mix of lethal decisiveness and clinical efficiency. The world of analysts, spreadsheets, and logistics had vanished. In its place was a Tier 1 operator orchestrating survival under fire. The sounds of suppressed fire, shouted commands, and detonation echoes were a controlled symphony to her. She noted every reaction, every hesitated micromovement, every misstep of the pirates, filing each observation into memory. The boarding, the assault, the command, it was all a test 10 in execution simultaneously. The team moved as one, guided by the invisible hand of authority Madison embodied, a ghost in the chaos yet tethered to every tactical element around her. The ocean air still clung to the deck, tangy with salt and gunpowder residue. Madison stood with her back straight, helmet off, hair down, and clinging to her neck, eyes scanning the horizon as the last hostage was guided toward the awaiting extraction boats. The team had done its job under her command, but the psychological landscape had shifted irrevocably. Every man aboard had seen, in real time, the collapse of their presumed alpha and the emergence of a command presence that none had anticipated. Patrick remained slumped on the crate, head in his hands. His breathing was uneven, shallow, almost panicked. Sweat ran in fine rivulets down the sides of his face, salt-stiffened hair matted to his forehead. His fingers flexed and unflexed in nervous tics, the pulse in his neck jumping visibly with every failed attempt at composure. Around him, the squad exchanged glances, a mixture of suppressed incredulity, cautious respect, and lingering disappointment. The arc of Patrick's hubris had been relentless, but now it was starkly illuminated. Every micro-expression, the jaw tightening, the eye flicker, the sudden blanching of his skin told the story more effectively than words ever could. A low thrum grew in the distance, signaling the approach of the extraction helicopter. The rhythmic beat of the rotor blades cut through the salt-laden night, each pulse punctuating Patrick's spiraling sense of defeat. Madison watched the team board efficiently, verifying that each hostage was secure and accounted for. Her movements were deliberate, precise, a subtle nod here, a hand signal there, micro-adjustments that ensured smooth execution without unnecessary risk. The analyst exterior was gone, replaced by command muscle memory and operational authority honed over decades. By the time the helicopter touched down, Patrick had forced himself to stand, though his posture was rigid, trembling at the knees. His face, once flushed with confidence, now held a chalky pallor. In the debrief room back at base the next day, he shuffled forward, each step uncertain, eyes flickering between Madison and the screen where Admiral Holloway's secure video feed had already connected. His voice, when it emerged, was brittle. "Admiral, I can explain." The Admiral's image filled the screen, the room sterile lighting catching the sharp angles of his face, underscoring the authority behind every word. He didn't glance at Patrick. His gaze landed firmly on Madison, who stood at attention, calm, composed, every sinew of her body controlled. "Commander," he addressed her, voice low but unwavering. Madison inclined her head slightly. "Admiral." The single word carried weight, reverberating across the room. Patrick's voice faltered further, almost a whisper. "Commander, but she's a woman. She's an analyst." His disbelief was palpable, the cadence of his speech broken by stammered attempts to reconcile what he'd witnessed with his preconceptions. The squad shifted uncomfortably, micro-expressions flickering across their faces, eyebrows raised, lips pressed tight, some glances toward Patrick that blended incredulity with subtle acknowledgement of Madison's command. Madison turned toward Patrick, her movement smooth, calculated, a predator settling its gaze on a cornered target. Her hand moved to the hidden pocket in her tactical vest. She produced a Velcro patch, worn but authoritative, and pressed it firmly onto her shoulder. The insignia gleamed under the fluorescent light, the trident, unmistakable. Above it, the emblem of a lieutenant commander of DevGru, one of the first women to integrate post-2016 policy changes. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension cracking audibly. "I wasn't here to count your beans, Patrick," Madison said, her voice low, icy, carrying the finality of judgment. Every syllable was deliberate, each pause weighted with the authority of one who had operated in life-and-death scenarios countless times. "I was here to audit your squadron. Command received reports of arrogance and negligence in this unit. You've just confirmed every single one of them." Tatrick's face shifted through a rapid sequence of micro-expressions: shock, disbelief, a flash of shame, and finally, a bitter, silent acknowledgement of failure. His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening, jaw tight, eyes flickering with the realization that the narrative he had controlled in his own mind, the heroic alpha, the leader of men, was irreversibly shattered. To Squad, silent but attentive, absorbed the revelation, the hierarchy recalibrated instantly in the mental ledger of every operator present. Madison stepped forward slightly, scanning the room one last time. The weight of command was not in words. It was in presence, in the measured microtext that communicated control and competence under the harshest scrutiny. Her gaze lingered briefly on Patrick, disappointment tempered with clinical observation, before she returned to the Admiral's feet. Every breath, every micro-adjustment of her stance underscored that in this world, authority was proven through action, not assumption. The room remained quiet, the low hum of electronics and the faint scent of salt and gunpowder the only reminders of the chaos they had just survived. And in that silence, the truth was undeniable. Madison had not only survived the audit. She had redefined the parameters of leadership, competence, and respect within the unit. Tatrick's failure was complete, and the lesson had been rendered in stark, unambiguous detail. The base smelled of oil, antiseptic, and the faint metallic tang of spent ammunition rounds. Madison's boots made a muted thud on the polished concrete as she moved toward the briefing room, her silhouette calm, deliberate, exuding the quiet authority of someone who had faced far worse than disgraced squad leaders and fractured egos. The squad, assembled under harsh fluorescent lights, avoid eye contact, some shifting their weight nervously, others letting subtle nods of respect escape as they watched their former alpha crumble. Tatrick sat rigid on the edge of the table, shoulders slumped, knuckles white against his thighs. His pulse was visible in the vein at his temple, a rapid staccato against the otherwise controlled environment. He swallowed hard, trying to reconstruct a semblance of command, but his breaths came short and shallow, and the tremor in his hands betrayed him. For the first time, the wall of arrogance he had built around himself had no purchase. Madison's presence was clinical, surgical, and he was the patient on the table. "You'll face a formal review, Patrick." Madison's voice cut through the low murmur of the room. It was even, precise, carrying authority without a trace of theatrics. "Command will determine whether this results in court-martial for negligence and failure under fire, or if you are permitted to resign through proper channels." His eyes flicked across the squad. A few opened their mouths weakly, offering partial defenses, murmurs like he said our backs before. That the truth had been laid bare in 3 stages: training, simulation, and live fire. Their respect for Madison had already shifted the calculus. Not a single voice pressed hard in his favor. His defenses, once so polished, were hollow echoes now swallowed by the weight of witnessed competence. I'll cooperate with the review," he rasped, the words almost a whisper. Every syllable carried the weight of someone realizing that a career, or reputation, and ego had all been stripped bare. "Could," Madison said, her voice still controlled, measured. "Hand over your trident for now. It is suspended pending inquiry." Tatrick obeyed, trembling hands peeling the insignia from his chest, the simple act of removal a physical manifestation of defeat. Every subtle tick, the flicker of the eye, the clench of his jaw, the involuntary tilt of his head spoke of the internal unraveling that no words could fully capture. She turned to the rest of the squad. "You both have potential, but you confuse nose with strength. Discipline is silent. Obedience, without ego, is lethal. From now on, you listen to your new squad leader." Her eyes rested briefly on Miller, the quietest man in the group, who had exhibited steady judgment and calm under fire. A slight nod from Madison was all it took. The mantle of authority passed without ceremony, weighted by the credibility of demonstrated competence. Madison walked toward the exit, her boots barely making a sound. Behind her, the squad remained in place, a tableau of reassessment and newly formed respect. Admiral Holloway's voice came over comms, a measured but approving tone. "Report to HQ for full debrief. Rough assessment?" the Admiral asked, the static in the comms buzzing softly. "One bad apple," Madison replied, her gaze sweeping the room one last time. Tatrick, now shell of his former bravado, handled his patches and insignia under the watchful eye of a staff NCO, hands trembling, face pale, the rest can be salvaged. Send them to Green Team for retraining, reinforce fundamentals. Correct what arrogance has corrupted. As she stepped out into the open air, the base falling behind her in both physical and psychological distance, the wind whipped across the tarmac, tugging at her uniform and headset. Madison adjusted the earpiece, her face once again the mask of quiet professional. No glance back, no lingering satisfaction, just the execution of duty completed with precision. The mission had ended not with spectacle, but with competence. The cancer had been cut out. Justice was silent, methodical, undeniable. Her boots clicked down the corridor, echoing faintly in the vastness of the base. The horizon beyond the compound was tinged with the first tints of dawn, a pale wash of light promising clarity. Madison's mind was already scanning for the next operational window, the next assessment, the next challenge. This was the cadence of her life: quiet, precise, lethal in execution, and unflinchingly professional. She walked away not to boast, but because her work, like the sea she had mastered, demanded focus beyond ego. For those who had witnessed the dismantling of arrogance and the rise of true operational authority, the lesson was indelible. Competence doesn't announce itself. It manifests in action. Madison had walked away, leaving a trail of recalibrated respect and hard-earned humility in her wake. If you want to see more stories of discipline, strategy, and unmatched operational mastery, make sure to subscribe to the channel.